Hey, I'm Amelia Mosley and you're watching BTN. Thanks for hanging out with us again. Let's see what's coming up on today's show. We find out how these two astronauts got stuck in space, meet the newest Australian native species, and learn more about Australia's vintage video games. All that soon, but first today we're going to find out about the CFMEU, which is one of Australia's biggest unions. Last week there were big protests all over the country about the government's decision to take away control of the construction part of the union. So what's going on? And what exactly is a union? Joe found out.
This is what the streets of Aussie cities looked like last week as tens of thousands of construction workers dropped their tools and went on strike. They are all members and supporters of the CFMEU, which has played a massive part in the lives and careers of workers like these for a long time. The history of unions goes back to the Industrial Revolution, when more people moved to cities and started working in factories and mines, where conditions could be brutal.
Workers could sometimes be forced to work really long hours.
How much longer?
In sometimes dangerous conditions.
This isn't safe.
And not always paid fairly.
Kids as young as 8 would sometimes be put to work, and for a lot less money than the adults.
But if a worker complained, they could be easily replaced. But this isn't fair.
Oh, I'm sorry. Well, in that case, you're fired! Get out of here! Come on, next.
But eventually the workers started to realise that if they banded together, they could force employers to listen to them and make changes.
Australia had a really strong union movement from the 1830s onwards. In fact, the Australian Labor Party, which is in charge today, was actually founded by the union movement back in 1901.
Over time, small unions started joining forces to give themselves more power to fight for workers' rights. And they had some pretty big wins, like a minimum wage, paid leave, better health and safety rules, and the 8-hour workday. People who worked on construction sites played a big part in making this happen. Workers that would eventually be represented by the CFMEU.
It was created in the 1990s to bring together unions for construction, forestry and maritime workers, and became one of the most powerful representatives for workers' rights in Australia. But recently, some leaders of the CFMEU's construction wing were accused of bullying, working with criminals, and corruption, which is using the union's power for their own benefit.
There's no place for corruption or intimidation in the building industry from unions.
Last week, Federal Attorney General Mark Dreyfus announced that all CFMEU construction branches around the country were being placed into administration, which means somebody independent is stepping in to run them for at least the next 3 years, until they can be sure that there's no more dodgy dealings. But the decision has made a lot of people really angry, because they think that unions should be able to represent their workers without interference from governments.
We said that administration was anti-democratic. We said that administration was not in the best interest of our members.
We're going to campaign for the absolute destruction of the Australian Labor Party in this country.
Others say it's not fair to punish the whole construction union over the bad behaviour of a few.
We're not thugs, we are workers, we have families. Now we're fighting for our genuine rights.
When you go out on site, people take care of you. They care about your well-being. That's not what's being portrayed, and it should be.
The government say that unions are important and do a lot of good for workers' rights. But to do that, they have to be honest and law-abiding.
The government is not for turning, and nor is the Australian public. They want to see this industry cleaned up.
We'll be back!
There was debate last week about a question in Australia's census, which is a survey that's held every how many years? Is it every 2 years, every 4 years, or every 5 years? The census is held every 5 years and it's a really important tool for gathering information about the Australian population. Last week, some people were upset when the government announced it was going to scrap a new question about gender identity and sexuality in the next census.
I think it's really important that we have the information so that we can make good decisions about the public services we need. But it's also about us as a country recognising who we are.
So later in the week, the government said it would be asking the Bureau of Statistics to test a question to include in the next census. Which country did the Prime Minister visit last week for the Pacific Islands Forum? Was it Tonga, Vanuatu or Samoa? It was in Tonga. Anthony Albanese joined leaders from around the Pacific and the world to talk about important issues facing the region, like climate change and security. And things got very messy last week at La Tomatina, which is a festival held every year in which country? Mexico, Italy or Spain? La Tomatina is held every year in Buñol, which is in Spain. It started in 1945 when two boys threw tomatoes at each other during a parade. Others thought that looked like fun and it became a whole thing.
Yes, we're going to go make some spaghetti to have with our tomato sauce.
Now let's head up to space, which is where these two astronauts will be spending the next 5 months after their spacecraft, the Boeing Starliner, malfunctioned. Ren can tell you all about it.
Imagine hopping on board a ship and blasting off into space. And then this happens.
I can't believe we're going to be spending a whole 8 days here.
Months.
Days?
Months.
Wait, what?
Well, that's what astronauts Sunita Williams and Barry Wilmore are facing right now. The pair arrived at the ISS back on the 6th of June, expecting to be there for just over a week. But they won't be returning home until around the time you guys go back to school next year. So, how did this happen? Well, Sonny and Butch are test pilots for Boeing. You know, the company famous for its planes. And in the past few years, it's been working really hard to become a major player in the space business. Boeing is one of just a couple of private companies that NASA contracted to build craft to get people and supplies to and from the International Space Station.
Or as we call it,
the ISS.
In 2019, Boeing's Starliner capsule had its first flight test.
Liftoff.
And after a few launches without astronauts on board, in May this year, it was ready for its first crewed mission to the ISS with Butch and Sonny. But thanks to problems with the spacecraft, that mission was delayed. Twice. Then, on June 6th...
3, 2, 1, ignition. And liftoff of Starliner and Atlas V.
There were celebrations. Until...
There's a problem with the spacecraft.
Wait, what do you mean by problem?
The Starliner has 28 thrusters, which are used to move the spacecraft. But as Sonny and Butch approached the ISS, 5 of them failed, which caused the craft to start leaking helium. While NASA and Boeing worked on the problem from Earth, Sonny and Butch did what they could in space.
This is a test flight. We were expecting to find some things, and so we are finding stuff, and we're correcting it and making changes, making updates with our control team.
Eventually, NASA and Boeing decided the Starliner wasn't safe. But luckily, there is another ship that can take them home. SpaceX's Dragon just arrived at the ISS with a crew of 4 and a couple of spare seats. But the crew won't be leaving for another
5 months. Ugh, that's a really, really long time.
But luckily, the ISS is set up for long stays. In fact, one astronaut, Dr. Peggy Whitson, has stayed at the station for a total of 665 days. It has 6 sleeping quarters, a kitted-out lab, and a gym, which is important for keeping up the muscle and bone mass, which you can lose in zero gravity. As for food, well, the menu includes more than 100 items, from vegetables and fruit to pre-prepared meals and desserts that are resupplied every 90 days or so. And the bathroom sitch? Well, astronauts use what's called a vacuum toilet.
So you have to have pretty good aim.
And the bathroom is full of hand and foot bars, so the astronauts don't drift off in the middle of their business. And fun fact, pee is more than 90% water. And since water is heavy and takes up a lot of space, it is actually better to recycle pee than send water from Earth.
Meaning yesterday's coffee is also today's coffee.
Literally.
Sunny and Butch have both spent long periods in space before, so this is nothing new to them. And there's plenty to keep them busy while they're up there, from spacewalks to science experiments. So yeah, they're gonna be okay.
Besides, there are plenty of worse places to be stuck than space.
I mean, look at that view. That one.
That one.
What's the name of the Russian spacecraft that takes people to and from the space station? Is it Soyuz, Sputnik, or Dragon? It's the Soyuz. The Soyuz MS-25 is actually parked at the space station right now, along with the Boeing Starliner, the SpaceX Dragon, and 3 other supply ships. Australia already has a huge variety of plants and animals, but did you know there are a whole lot more that we haven't discovered or named yet? It's why the government has announced new funding for taxonomy projects. What's taxonomy, you ask? Let's find out.
Australia, meet your newest plants and animals. Introducing the Western laughing tree frog, which laughs rather than croaks. The Venomius, an orb spider named after a Marvel villain. We have a new butterfly, some new types of algae, a new lizard, a new mouse, and we even have a new worm called the Sir David Attenborough, named after, you guessed it, Sir David Attenborough. They're just some of the 750 new plants and animals that have been added to Australia's national species list. You see, while you might think Australia has an impressive array of flora and fauna, every year thousands of new species are discovered, described and named. And that is no simple business. In fact, it's a whole branch of science called taxonomy.
So Ben, can you explain to us what taxonomy is?
So taxonomy is a science where we name, describe and classify all living organisms.
Ben is an entomologist here at the South Australian Museum, and taxonomy is a big part of his job. He says the first step is always figuring out whether a species is actually new.
We compare the species to all of the other named species to make sure that we can tell it apart.
Then it's time to file that species in the Library of Living Things, known as the taxonomic rank.
This starts at kingdom, goes to phylum, then class, then order, family, genus, and finally species.
So if you find a new species, maybe perhaps a new beetle, can you just name it whatever you want? Like your name is Ben, could you name it Benny McBenface? Would that be something you could do?
So there's actually rules that we follow to name new species. So some of those rules are, firstly, it needs to be unique. We also can't choose rude names or offensive names.
Fair enough.
And then the other rule is that we actually can't name them after ourselves. It's kind of a bit of a taboo that you don't do.
So Benny McBenface is out of the question.
Definitely
then.
out of the question.
Yeah.
As for the 750 new species, some were named after the place they were found, the way they looked, or the things they do. And some names were a little more marvellous.
Scientists must have been massive Marvel fans because when they were studying this spider under the microscope, they looked at the spider's abdomen and they saw Venom's mask. The scientists gave the official name Vermonius tomhardii.
Ryan is part of the team who tracks and names all of our new species. And he says taxonomy is way more important than most of us realise.
Taxonomy is kind of like electricity in our houses. It's something that we take for granted, but it's so important for powering our computers in our day-to-day lives. Taxonomy allows us to identify species that might have new drugs that we could turn into the medicines of the future.
It's why the government has just put a bunch of money into taxonomy research projects right around the country.
Unless we can describe every Australian plant and animal, we can't properly protect them.
The Environment Minister says we need to know exactly what species are out there so we can know what threats they face and how to protect the ones that need it.
Is it possible for myself or someone watching this to just go outside right now and discover a new species?
So we've only named about 30% of Australian species. So there's a huge amount of unknown species still out there.
Yeah, 70%.
Yeah, so you could actually go out now and start looking for new species and probably find one.
Well, what am I waiting for? All right, let's go.
We love watching BTN at Wilmore Primary School!
Now to an organisation that's also trying to classify and preserve things, but this time it's video games. The National Film and Sound Archive says Australia's games are in danger of disappearing and it wants to stop that from happening. Here's Jack.
G'day, I'm Outback Jack. Press A to start. I need your help. There are some cracker Aussie video games out here in the bush that need rescuing. Let's go.
Australia might not be the first country you think of when it comes to making video games, but Australia's been a big part of the industry for a long time.
Crikey, look out, there's The Hobbit.
Wait, isn't The Hobbit like a New Zealand thing?
Technically it's a book by a British author, but in 1982 one of Australia's very first video game companies, Beam Software, released this classic that became popular around the world.
Oh, well there you go.
Along with The Hobbit, there were titles like Hungry Horace and The Way of the Exploding Fist. And while they look a little different to what we're used to today, they were revolutionary at the time and led the way for today's Aussie-made games. From stylised adventure games, who are you, to games that are a little weird and wacky, as well as games you can play on your phone.
Look out, Cobber, that there is Fruit Ninja. Press B to take it back to the archives.
Yes.
The games industry in Australia is now bigger than the film and music industry put together. That's how important it is, that's how central it is to people's lives, and we're the audiovisual archive for Australia, and games are the biggest audiovisual phenomena of our time.
Torsten is from the National Film and Sound Archive, which, as the name suggests, is responsible for archiving the Australian TV shows, films, songs, speeches, and any other picture or sound that has helped shape our history.
Look at me. You're terrible, Miriam.
Since 2019, they've been adding Australian video games to their collection, including some oldies like The Hobbit and Hungry Horace, as well as some newer games like LA Noire and Untitled Goose Game.
Oh, quick, grab that silly goose before it spits the dummy.
Around the world it's done a little bit differently. Some places basically put them on a shelf and that's their collecting and preserving. What we do here at the National Film and Sound Archive is digitise every one of them.
Recently, the National Film and Sound Archive did a big survey and found that a lot of archiving institutes around the world are struggling when it comes to preserving video games.
Resourcing, I think, was one of the big issues, how much money and how many people were involved in each institution. There are lots of legal issues around copyright and those sort of things, which make preservation difficult around the world. But for me, one of the really interesting ones was that it's actually much harder to collect and preserve games that are being put out now as digital-only games, particularly on things like mobile platforms, than it is games going back to the 70s and 80s that came on cassettes or cartridges or optical discs.
The National Film and Sound Archive say they will continue to add Aussie video games to their collections. And some gaming companies have already started archiving their own. So hopefully these video games will be rescued from disappearing altogether.
Wait, but who's going to archive this game? I don't know, it'll probably end up somewhere in the ABC archives.
Oh yeah, no, that makes sense.
The Aussie Paralympic campaign is going strong in Paris. Thomas Gallagher claimed the first gold in the men's S10 50-metre freestyle, while Nikki Ayres and Jed Oldswogger followed it up in Australia's first para-rowing gold ever in the PR3 mixed double sculls. And out of the water, Lena Lay and Xian Yang grabbed the women's doubles table tennis gold, with Emily Petricola, Corey Boddington and Amanda Reid picking up 3 more golds on the cycle track. Now to the AFLW, where North Melbourne has had a huge victory over Brisbane to kick off the season.
North are on fire!
It was a pretty windy opening round, but that didn't stop the Roos from sealing a 44-point win over the reigning champs. Meanwhile, Hawthorn enjoyed its biggest ever win, smashing Carlton by 38 points. And finally, let's shift gears to the Italian Grand Prix, where it was a big victory for this guy.
Charles Leclerc is the winner!
It was a rough setup for Leclerc after losing the initial lead to Aussie Oscar Piastri, but a quick decision to opt for only one pit stop saved him the title, leaving Piastri to finish in second.
Finally today, let's meet a winner of Takeover Lismore, a competition that asked young people living in the region to tell stories about their lives and things that are important to them. And Cameron has an interesting story to tell about growing up with medieval Vikings. Check it out.
I've grown up in a Viking village where there are clever craftsmen and fearless warriors. I've whittled away many Saturdays watching my mum on the battlefield. She swings her metal sword and I can hear it clang against leather armor and chainmail. My family has been a part of Ragnar's Lith for as long as I can remember. It's a Viking reenactment group in Lismore. During winter solstice, the group sets up a Viking village right here in the middle of town. It's like stepping back in time. There's Dark Age weaving and leather making, and spit roasts and stews big enough to feed a hungry horde. I have my own costume. It resembles what Viking villagers would have worn. I haven't found my role in the lift yet, but I've tried a few things. Carving was a big part of Viking life, and it's my latest hobby. I'm neurodiverse and sometimes I get hyperfixated on things. I went through a Dungeons and Dragons phase, but cooking has been a constant. When I find a meal I really like, I make it again and again until it's perfect. Then I move on to the next thing. It's like my mind craves the unexpected. I struggle with routine. My kryptonite is repetitiveness. I think that's why I like carving. You can make anything, even if it's just the perfect marshmallow stick. I want to get good enough to carve weapons for the Viking battlefield. To me, the most interesting thing about our reenactment group is the tough as hell. The combatants get bruises and don't complain. Some people think it's strange when I tell them I've grown up in a Viking village. But I think it's awesome.
Well, that's it for today, but we'll be back with more BTN next week. And in the meantime, you can check out our website and you can keep up to date with Newsbreak right here in the studio every weeknight. Have a good one and I'll see you really soon. Bye.